Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Garnet Henderson. You are with Rewire News Group and also have your own podcast, Access Pod, which delves deep into everything abortion, choice, and the nationwide and now state-based attack on a women's right to choose. And Donald Trump has been, I guess, trying to have his cake and eat it too on this issue. But he did an unexpected video on Truth Social, um, basically saying he's for the status quo, but in my view, kind of keeping it open. Basically, he said he is happy they overturned Roe v. Wade, believes it should be a state-based decision. Some states will be more conservative.
Many people have asked me what my position is on abortion and abortion rights, especially since I was proudly the person responsible for the ending of something that all legal scholars, both sides, wanted and, in fact, demanded be ended. Roe v. Wade. They wanted it ended. My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land, in this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people.
But I didn't hear within that what he would do if a national abortion ban came to his desk. What were your thoughts on his kind of wacky video?
Sure. I mean, I think he's just campaigning, right? And voters have time and again, including in quite conservative states, shown that they really don't support the criminalization of abortion. And when they've had the opportunity to vote directly on the issue, they have voted in favor of abortion rights, again, including conservative people. And so I think Trump is feeling that, and he's starting to feel at least a little bit of pressure that voters care about this issue. And we also know that he's someone who has no qualms about lying, right? So I think he's absolutely trying to have his cake and eat it too in this moment. He's claiming proud credit for being the president that ended Roe versus Wade, which certainly is true. And frankly, I think a lot of people have already kind of forgotten that it really was Trump who appointed that supermajority of conservative justices to the court who ended Roe. And I think another really important thing to be aware of is that Trump, when he was actually in office, really outsourced his abortion policy to members of the conservative legal movement. In particular, he stacked his Department of Health and Human Services with activist conservative lawyers. And I think it's very likely he would do that again. And those people absolutely are planning for a national abortion ban. And so you're exactly right. Trump didn't say what he would do if one came to his desk. And there are also ways that those conservative lawyers are thinking of that could ban abortion without any new legislation being required. So I think it's very important that we have not heard him give a clear stance one way or the other on the issue of a national ban.
And something from his statement wasn't the most coherent, which is not surprising, but he talked about the difference in states, and some states might be more conservative than others. I kind of heard it as, a subtle wink, wink. You could go further with me as president, because we've read the reports of, they're going to fire, a whole lot of the national bureaucracy, civil servants, put in his own people that, with a loyalty oath. Obviously, he weaponized his Department of Justice last time. So did you take anything from, him saying it will vary state to state, but might be more conservative in other states?
Yeah, I think partly that's just a cop-out. I mean, that's the same thing we heard from the Supreme Court, right? That's what the decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health says explicitly, that the court wanted to return the issue of abortion to the states. But now already this term they're hearing 2 abortion-related cases. So not so much, right? And so I think partly that is just the GOP's line on abortion. That's kind of the talking point that they've developed there, right, is that abortion is now a state's issue. And sort of surprisingly, I think we're just hearing Donald Trump mirror that GOP talking point, really. But as you said, we know that if he does get elected, he's going to install his own people in the federal government, in all of those boring bureaucratic offices that nobody typically pays much attention to. And, earlier I referenced the fact that there are conservative attorneys that have many different routes they've planned toward a national abortion ban. And the easiest one is to simply resurrect the Comstock Act, which is a law from 1873 that banned sending anything that could be considered obscene or lewd in the mail. And that includes not just US mail, but any type of shipping. So that would include UPS, FedEx as well. That is an easy path to a total national ban on both abortion and contraception, really anything that Republicans might consider inappropriate. And that law, even though it was chipped away at over the years, is still on the books. So that's a path to a national abortion ban with zero new legislation. All Republicans need to achieve that is either a Supreme Court that would like to invoke the Comstock Act, and both Thomas and Alito referenced Comstock in recent oral arguments in one of those abortion-related Supreme Court cases, or the Department of Justice could simply start enforcing the Comstock Act. So that is exactly the type of thing that could happen under Trump, depending on who he installs in the Department of Justice, without Congress doing anything and without him having to sign any legislation at all.
Do you feel when it comes to him going by the states, we know Texas, I believe it was, has come up with kind of a law or proposed something that could criminalize women leaving the state to get an abortion? I know he didn't talk about that, but it does seem to me when he's pointing, it'll be based on the states, he can basically look the other way or federally enforce if more states would try to penalize women that leave.
Yeah, so Idaho was the first state to pass a law like that. But what they did is they criminalized, they referred to it as an abortion trafficking bill. So they criminalized transporting a minor within the state of Idaho for the purposes of having an abortion, if you're not that minor's parent or guardian, although there were legislators at the time who argued that it should have gone farther and criminalized parents as well. That law is currently blocked because it's being challenged in court, but we've seen already in several state legislatures in the other states that have banned abortion, identical, it's the model legislation thing. So we've seen identical legislation be introduced in other states. Remains to be seen exactly what they'll do and how much other states might want to expand those laws. Certainly, it's something that conservative lawmakers are talking a lot about is can they prevent people from leaving the state, because they know that many people are leaving those states to get abortions elsewhere. And so, yes, I think that's another thing that's really important to keep an eye on, because another person who is now quite close to Donald Trump is Jonathan Mitchell, who was the architect of SB 8. That was the abortion ban in Texas that went into effect before Roe was even overturned, that had that novel civil enforcement mechanism. So it invited anybody to be a bounty hunter and to sue you for helping someone get an abortion in violation of that law. Jonathan Mitchell just represented Donald Trump before the Supreme Court. And he actually said recently that he hopes Donald Trump doesn't know anything about Comstock because he doesn't want Trump to run his mouth. So people like Jonathan Mitchell are not only really pushing for a resurrection of Comstock if and when they get another Republican in the White House, they're also thinking about other ways they can kind of stretch our law and stretch precedent to have laws from some states apply across state lines, which typically is something it's not how laws work in the US.
Mm-hmm. And he didn't talk about it, but obviously the Supreme Court recently heard oral arguments on the abortion pill.
Yes.
It seems like even some of the conservative justices did not favorably view the argument of banning the abortion pill. What were your thoughts on that in terms of there seems like a discrepancy when they were viewing Roe v. Wade versus the abortion pill?
Yeah, those were the arguments in which I said both Thomas and Alito did bring up the Comstock Act. So I think you're absolutely right that even some of the very conservative justices on this case, on the court, were really looking askance at this case because it is frankly an absurd case. there are anti-abortion doctors who are suing the FDA to try and either reverse or alter their approval of one of the drugs used for medication abortion, mifepristone, on the basis that they may one day have to care for people experiencing complications from medication abortion. And so even Amy Coney Barrett, for example, pointed out that none of these doctors could point to a single instance where they had been forced to care for someone experiencing those type of complications against their will, because we have protections for doctors in the United States who object on religious or moral grounds. And so any doctor who doesn't want to treat someone in that circumstance can simply say no. I think there's an important debate to be had there about whether or not that's something we should actually allow. But that's something that both Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh asked a lot of questions about. So I think it's true that this case is just a little too ridiculous, even for those justices. However, I expect that we're going to see Thomas and Alito separately or together probably write a dissent that resurrects or signals that they would like to resurrect the Comstock Act, rather. And then I do think that all those questions, because both Barrett and Kavanaugh asked a lot of questions about those religious objection and conscientious objection protections for doctors. And that does not bode well, in my view, for the other abortion-related case the Supreme Court is hearing this month now, which is about whether or not Idaho can enforce its abortion ban that violates a federal law called EMTALA that requires that abortions be provided in hospitals when an abortion is the treatment for an emergency, basically. And Idaho's exceptions to its abortion ban are just so narrow that the federal government is arguing the ban violates EMTALA. And Idaho, of course, is arguing that it does not. And so I think the fact that so many of the conservative justices were really focused on this issue of doctors' ability to refuse care does not bode well for that case and for those emergency protections.
Mm-hmm. And obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but
No.
You follow this as a podcast and it's something you report on extensively. I'm not a woman, but do you have fear that, I mean, this is Donald Trump. He doesn't really have a core ideology other than him. Do you have fear that if he becomes president again, he's joked about, redoing the Constitution, serving more than one term? He's talking about, I want to be a dictator on day one. He's joked about, I admire, not joked about, he said, I admire Orban and strongmen like that. Do you fear that he could kind of, look at Florida, for example, 6 weeks and then, to try and make a deal, push it to, 9 weeks or 10 weeks, which in a lot of cases is effectively a ban because most women don't know they're pregnant at that point.
Absolutely. And there can also just be so many other delays along the way to getting an abortion, particularly if you have to travel out of the state that you live in, right, to get it. And so, yeah, I absolutely worry about that. I think lots of people dismissed Donald Trump at their peril in 2016, right? I think it's really easy to laugh him off because he is such a ridiculous person and he is so inconsistent. But I think that is exactly the concern, right? As you said, he has no fixed ideology. We have no idea what he actually believes, but we know he's going to do what he wants to do and what he feels will bring him more power, I think. So I'm absolutely worried about the prospect of some kind of new national abortion ban. He has in the past said that he would support a ban on abortion at 15 weeks of pregnancy. He kind of seemed to pedal that back in his recent statements. But when he was campaigning in 2016, he said that women who have abortions should be punished for it. So I think we should be very concerned about those past statements. And like I said, the fact that he is probably just going to install a bunch of conservative activist lawyers in important positions in the government if he wins. And they really are pushing to use basically administrative tricks to put a national ban in place. I mean, the reason why the Comstock Act is such a threat is because if you think about it, every single thing that's in your doctor's office was shipped or delivered, right? It was carried there somehow at some point. And so that's why it's such a powerful potential tool for, Republican administration to just ban anything that they don't like. And so I really think that 1873 law should be the thing we're most concerned about in the event of any Republican presidential administration, Donald Trump or otherwise.
And on the other end, if Biden were to win, I mean, He's pushed. We're going to codify Roe v. Wade. They didn't seem to be in a rush to do it for the last decade or two. But as far as I could tell, he does not believe in getting rid of the filibuster. They're not going to have a 60-seat, filibuster-proof Senate. Even if they did, there are some Democrats who, are flexible on certain issues. So if they're running, which they are, on put us back in and we'll codify Roe v. Wade, do you see, any evidence that would be that would happen?
No, I mean, Joe Biden said in 1974, because this man has been in public office for a long time, right? He has a long track record. And he said in 1974 that he thought Roe went too far. Just recently, he said to the New Yorker that he doesn't really believe in my body, my choice. So, he's saying, vote for me. I'm the guy who's going to codify Roe versus Wade. But then he's constantly reminding us that he actually thinks abortion is bad. And lots of people defend him and say, oh, he's Catholic. This is America, right? We have separation of church and state, or we're supposed to. So his personal religious views shouldn't really come into his feelings as a lawmaker or what he thinks is appropriate policy. And so that seems to be what he's trying to say, right? Is I don't necessarily believe in abortion, but I think Roe was right. And the problem is, as you said, he has said that he doesn't want to end the filibuster, and he doesn't want to expand the Supreme Court. And so the problem is that any legislation that gets passed on the federal level is going to get killed by this Supreme Court. Any legislation that would protect abortion rights, right? So unless he is saying, I'm going to codify Roe versus Wade and I'm going to eliminate the filibuster and expand the Supreme Court, then no, I don't have a lot of hope for his administration actually doing anything to turn the tide against all this.
And my last question, there's another option outside of the national born question. We know with Donald Trump, I mean, his MO is just use the legal system and delay. Couldn't, with him as president, the pro-life movement just shift to each state will up the ante? Maybe some states will just push an outright ban and then water it down in lawsuits. So you'll have pro-choice groups sue, and there will be lawsuits and decisions and appeals, which, that could go on for 4 or 5 years. The original bounty hunter example in Texas, that was allowed to stand while it was in. So by Trump saying, let's continue states deciding, couldn't these pro-life groups, which is a whole industry, just shift their budget to lawsuits?
Absolutely. And also it's important to remember, we already have 14 states that ban abortion outright currently. Florida has a 6-week ban that goes into effect in less than a month. So with that, it'll be 14 states that ban abortion, 3 that ban it at 6 weeks. And then we have others like North Carolina that have, North Carolina moved from 20 weeks to 12, right? So yes, we're absolutely, in the absence of federal action to protect abortion rights, we're going to see states like that continue to chip away at abortion rights. We're also going to see obstructionism in the states that have had these ballot measures where voters have turned out to say that they want abortion to be legal. We're already seeing lawmakers in many of those states do everything they can to undermine that. So that's exactly right. I mean, the anti-abortion movement is going to throw their weight behind whatever they think is going to work. And they have a long history of very effective obstructionism. So absolutely, they can take that tack because they've done it before.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Garnet Henderson with Rewire News Group. And definitely check out her podcast, Access Pod, for this and a lot of other issues on this never-ending issue. And let's not forget, we're talking the politics of it. This has been normalized, but there's still women suffering, particularly poor women, women who don't have money to travel, women who have to make important, health choices without, the proper support. So this is real life for a lot of people, even though the shock of this choice, the overturning, might have dissipated. People are still suffering.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.